Hello, my name is Moze Mossanen, and I'm the writer and director of the feature documentary film You Are Here, A Come From Away Story. When we went to Newfoundland in September of 2017 to shoot this film, I knew we were going there to shoot a film about love, compassion, and generosity. But nowhere in my wildest dreams did I think that we, the film crew, would be subjected to the same kind of warm hospitality and generosity as the plain people were treated to when they were all stranded there for 5 days during 9/11. I think on the second or third day, the mayor of Gander, Claude Elliott, came up to us and said, how many people are there in your crew? And I said, well, there are about 9 of us. He said, 9. Oh, well, doesn't matter. Listen, you're all coming to my house for dinner on Friday night. Where he treated us to a very traditional Newfoundland jigs dinner. And I turned to our producer, Peter Gentile, and I said, which city can you go to in this world where upon arrival, the mayor of that city will invite you for dinner? Anyway, that kind of generosity and openness and love was very much with us the entire time we were shooting the film. And it allowed us to make this film because the people of Newfoundland, as well as the plain people, opened up their hearts, their minds, and they told us their stories in order to make this film. I'm really, really indebted to all of them. I hope you like this film, and I'll be back afterwards to talk to you, to answer your questions. Enjoy the film. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, virtual audience, and a warm welcome to the panel discussion of Moze Mossanen's You Are Here, A Come From Away Story. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Greg Chan, the KDocsFF Community Outreach Director and the organizer of this social justice event. Thank you very much for joining us. I would like to open our event by acknowledging the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Semiahmoo, Tawasin, Kakwat, and Coquitlam peoples on whose unceded ancestral lands we work, study, and live. I am zooming in from Musqueam territory. KDocsFF is proud to present You Are Here to commemorate the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and to pay tribute to the kindness and decency of Ganderites and Newfoundlanders on a dark week in history. I think Mr. Rogers' wisdom says it best. When the news is scary, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. It's kind of a rarity. It's not often that you find a feel-good social justice documentary, but You Are Here is that special film. And I'm just so happy that we discovered it and that we're able to share it with all of you. Special thanks go out to Moze and MDF Productions, who have generously allowed KDocsFF to screen this documentary for the KPU community. I've heard that several faculty have assigned our event as a writing assignment or a bonus marks activity. So panelists, you are officially part of student research with your role on the panel. Okay, audience, so now we're going to, I'm going to pass it over to our moderator, Kelly Doyle. And this will start the panel discussion of You Are Here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event today. I'd like to start by saying I very much appreciate the opportunity to be involved and to have seen this film as somebody from Newfoundland. So I'm your moderator today, but I suppose also your token Newfoundlander. My caveat is that I can't say for sure that my accent is not going to come back today. So we'll see what happens. But I'd like to start by introducing our panel today. So what I'll do is sort of work my way around and let the panelists introduce themselves. So I guess for our panelists, if you have your microphones muted and your video, we can turn those on at this point for panelists. I'm not sure if Claude is with us today. Is Claude here?
We're having a technical issue with Claude, so we're just working on that. He will be joining us shortly.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that, Greg. So in the spirit, it's one of the reasons I wanted to start with Claude. I was really excited to say, how's you getting on today? So I'll say that to everybody here as a Newfoundlander, and we'll start there. But in the meantime, perhaps I'll start with our director, Moze Mossanen. So I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, Moze?
Sure. My name is Moze Mossanen. I'm privileged to be the director and writer of You Are Here, A Come From Away Story. I'd also like to acknowledge that our two producers, Peter Gentili, lead producer, and Bill House, who's our executive producer as well, who are very much a part of making the film.
Wonderful, thank you. Nick and Diane Marson are also with us today, as you probably all recognize from the documentary. Nick and Diane, would you like to introduce yourselves briefly?
I'm Diane.
And I'm Nick. Diane's obviously got a different accent to me.
I'm from Texas.
And I'm originally from the UK. I was traveling on Continental 5 during 9/11. We both were. And we were stranded in Newfoundland. And we basically landed in heaven and looked after by these angels who displayed the very best of humanity.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to have you here with us today. Dr. Valerie Vezina.
Hi, I'm Valerie. So I'm a faculty in political science at Kwantlen. And as you may notice, my accent is not a Newfoundlander accent, but really French. But Newfoundland is my home. That's where I actually found who I was way back in my early 20s. That's where I met my other half. That's where we have a house. That's where I go back when I want to be home. So I've also studied extensively Newfoundland for my research. So it's a part of both my personal life and my professional life.
Wonderful, thank you. And last, but of course not least, Dr. Gavin Paul.
I'm Gavin Paul. I'm a faculty member in the English department here at Kwantlen. I think the only Newfoundlander phrase I know, I worked with a couple guys from Newfoundland one summer, and it took me about 2 days to figure it out. But they were telling me to stay where I was one time, and they said, "Stay where you're from, because it comes where you to." And I think it took about 48 hours later, I clued in on what they were trying to tell me. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks to Greg for inviting me and for organizing this event.
Thank you, everybody. So here is our panel for today. And just to springboard on top of that, I mean, the one that I often use is "stay where you're to till he comes where you're at," but they're pretty much interchangeable. So what I'd actually like to do is to start by giving the panel the opportunity to offer some opening reflections or remarks, because I know that one of the things I've been hearing consistently from people about this documentary, and I'm no exception, is that personally I've gotten choked up watching this, which I think is a very good sign. So I'd just like to invite the panelists to offer any opening remarks or reflections about the film.
Who should go first?
Well, since you've started, Moze, I think that makes sense. You go ahead, please.
It's interesting what you say about getting choked up, because we were, I think I can speak for myself, and I can probably speak for most of the crew. We were choked up during the entire making of the film, because it really was the first time that a lot of us had dealt with 9/11 so closely, and just hearing the stories, not just from the Plain people, but also from the Newfoundlanders, of course, you know, who were so incredibly busy during those 5 days. But it brought everybody on the crew close to the reality of 9/11. And it was, there were times during the shooting and during the editing period, and also during even the release of the film, where we had to appear, you know, to introduce the film. It was always a very emotional experience. You were always trying to hold our feelings together, especially during editing, where there were days where actually we had to stop and take a break, and you know, and come back to it and renewed. So I know exactly what you mean by having this emotional experience, because it was very much within us when we made the film.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for a preliminary reflection. Nick and Diane, do you have an opening reflection that you'd like to share with the audience today?
It was wonderful to reunite with everyone there, and it was very emotional to go back to that day and what your feelings were, and to hear more from the other people as well, don't you think?
Yes, Moze played a little trick on us. There was a young man, his name was Roy, and when we met Roy in 2001, he was 14 years old. And we kept in touch with his family. And we'd been back to Newfoundland nine times. But Roy was then, he was working on the mainland, elsewhere, and we hadn't seen him. And we had a reunion with the family, and I turned around and there was this rather large lad, and it was Roy, and both of us burst into tears. And every time I see the movie, and Diane's doing it now, and that's all part of how we got together, because she's a bit of a crybaby. So yeah, it was a wonderful movie. Not only it's not just a movie, but it also confirms Come From Away. If you've seen Come From Away, all of the characters are in Moze's movie, and each one of them ratifies the other.
Everyone has their own story.
Yeah, and we probably talked for too long now.
No, not at all. Thank you so much for that. Valerie, what is your opening reflection or reaction to the film?
Yes, I think for everybody that is 20 years old and older, we all remember where we were on 9/11. It's kind of a defining moment. So for maybe students in the audience, when your professor are like, oh, 9/11 was a defining moment, and you have no idea, or you were too young to remember, it was like everybody remembers exactly what they were doing, where they were, and what happened. And 20 years have passed. And then there's been, especially during this whole pandemic we've been going through, there's been a lot of polarization. And it was also the feeling we had after 9/11, like you were either with the United States or against it, right? Remember that discourse from President Bush at the time. And this polarization, I do politics, obviously, so it's really ingrained, right? And then I often wonder if the social fabric of society is just, going away, and there's no more love or kindness. And so it was really refreshing. I'm getting really emotional to see Moze's movie, and and I'm really honored to be with Nick and Diane, because that's what actually unites us as humans. It's love. It's this compassion. And I think 20 years ago, we needed this, and we needed this again today. So thank you so much for making this movie, for sharing your stories, and for allowing me to be part of this discussion today.
I think I'm on the verge of tears again now. I'm going to try and put a lid on that today, but okay. Thank you so much. Gavin, what are your thoughts as we open today?
Well, I think I would sort of echo a lot of what's already been said. I'm very grateful for being introduced to the film. I'm coming at it from a different place. So I'm not a Newfoundlander. I've actually never been to Newfoundland, so I'm not native to Newfoundland. I'm not an adopted Newfoundlander. I'm not a student or a teacher of film. My experience comes from working with materials, novels primarily related to September 11th in English classrooms. And I'm coming to the movie, or my gratitude for the movie, if I can explain it, my experience with 9/11 is one of absences and sort of empty spaces. And a lot of the literature coming out of 9/11 sort of grappled with just trying to make sense of that horrific day. And what complicates making sense of that day has to do with a lack of things and an absence of things, whether that's missing planes or collapsed towers or missing loved ones, even a lack of a resolution, I think, 20 years later, I think is what complicates and still makes that day so traumatic. Even the way I think we continue to talk and think about that day sort of has that absence encoded within it. If we think about phrases like September 11th or 9/11, those are very evocative terms, but they're also very cryptic, right? They don't point to a specific location. They don't have a specific year attached to them. Even a phrase like ground zero, when you start to lean on that term, it becomes rather cryptic, right? It takes us to New York, but of course, New York isn't the only place that was affected on that day. So coming to the movie and sort of spending so much time thinking about absences and empty spaces and lack of things, I think I was so struck by the opening shot of the film, because where Moze takes us is to the memorial site and the footprints left by the towers and the reflecting pools and the names that are imprinted around them. And I believe, as far as I know, that memorial at Ground Zero is entitled Reflecting Absence. And I think it's very aptly named. What I appreciate about the film and why I'm so grateful for having been introduced to it is it was a healthy reminder that engagements with 9/11, thinking about that day, don't have to center on the absence of things. They can actually focus on the abundance of things. That's what really struck me in watching the movie. It was all about abundance. It was too many planes. It was too many people. It was an abundance of food being prepared, an abundance of clothes being donated, even an abundance of toilet paper at one point. And all of those remarkable words that Moze used in his introduction, the abundance of love and compassion and openness and generosity, that was a really important reminder for me about the stories of that day.
Thank you so much, Gavin. I think that's a really poignant place for us to transition into discussion today. I do have some questions that were sent in the last couple of days, but if I may be so bold, I do have a springboard question that I would like to ask Moze before I transition to audience questions, because it dovetails with something that Gavin had just said. And like Gavin, as a film theorist, a horror film theorist in particular, I spent a lot of time looking at framing, and I too was struck by your opening sequence and the mise-en-scène choices that you made in that opening sequence, where you have such a somber tone, but still, we have the slow motion snowfall and the water falling, and it's very peaceful, but we're also hearing and remembering, and in some ways, I think, reliving those voices in the background and the tragedy. And something that I really would be interested to hear is why you felt it was so important to open the film the way that you did.
It's a good question, actually. It's a very good question. I mean, first of all, I just want to say that there was an angel sitting on all our shoulders when we made the film. And I don't know whether it was because it was the spirit of Newfoundland or the importance of the story and what Come From Away did. But we were constantly blessed with, in fact, I'm not religious, but that's a good word to use. We were blessed with amazing events that happened that and the opening sequence of that was one of those incredibly beautiful gifts we were given. We went to Ground Zero to film that scene, but it was supposed to be a sunny day, so we were sort of like gearing up for this. But then, as we were setting up, the clouds came over and it started to snow, and my first reaction was to panic because I thought we were going to lose the light, and it messed up exactly what I had planned. But then a cinematographer, Ian Kerr, turned to me and said, "Moze, look at it. Just look at it. Look what's happening, And I looked, and it took me a while, but then I got it. That what I was looking at was not snow, it was ash. And it was such an incredible emotional moment for all of us when we realized how we could interpret this. And it was a gift, really. It was really a gift for us. But in terms of what the reason we opened with that scene is because everything really started with that. When those towers came down, the world changed in the moments after the planes were hit and those towers came down, and it changed forever in ways that we're still experiencing them. So I think it was just important to start with that seminal event, and equally difficult was to show the towers coming down, and we really wrestled with that. And at one point we were discussing whether or not to show it at all, but it became important just because of the enormity of feeling that you have when you go to Ground Zero, when you look at those reflecting pools, and what that entailed. So Yeah, it was, and working our way through the editing of that, I think was one of the toughest moments, actually.
Thank you so much for that. Definitely a very evocative scene, and I think really pays homage to the fact that this tragedy is the springboard for everything that becomes more and more uplifting that we see a little bit later. So I have a question from Judy. I think Moze for you as well. And Judy asks if the focus or concept for the documentary changed at all as you started to speak to your subjects. Did you have a plan in mind that changed as you spoke to the people in your film?
Yeah, no, I, for good or for bad, I had the whole idea, the movie in my head before we went into it, for the strict reason that, you know, our funding was based on the submission of a very detailed proposal and treatment. I had to show our funders what the hell I was going to do with the money that they're going to give us. So I had a pretty good, clear idea. And also, I knew how the movie was going to end, which I rarely don't. You know, when you make a documentary, you never know how it's going to end. But I knew that a movie was going to end when all the Plain people and some of the Newfoundlanders were going to walk on stage and take a bow along with their dramatic counterparts. I knew that was going to happen at the end. And in a way, sort of, I worked backwards from there. You know, in a way, the beginning of the ending of the movie informed the beginning. That was really. That's really, I think that's the only, but in terms of in terms of what changed within me, I think I changed. I think I really changed through the making of this movie. It forced me to look a little bit more closely with the relationships of my own life, with my family, with my friends, my associates. So if there is conflict, you know, do you give in to your first impulse is to fight back, or do you revisit, or do you come at it with a sense of compassion, with generosity, with kindness? So I'm not saying it happens all the time now, but it was. I was muted there for a second. I don't know why. Did you get that? I didn't know where I went mute.
I think it was just the last tail end there.
Mm-hmm. I was just saying that it taught me. It provided me with a different way of dealing with more difficult things in your life. You know, choose compassion, choose generosity. It's something I constantly need to remind myself.
Wonderful, thank you.
Kelly, can I just jump in for a second?
Yes, of course.
So Moze, I really liked your answer and how you say we needed to provide a detailed account so that the funders, right, like get this. And I was like, man, the Newfoundlanders, they give you the detailed account. Like I was there with Janet drinking my tea, and then the phone rang, and then you have all of this. And this is really typical of the people of that province. And I thought that you show that very well in the movie. Not only did you, I think, did your funders really proud, but I think you actually also did justice to the people of that place where they will give you all of those details, right? Like precisely. So
I'm really glad you said that, because and this other gift we were given is the gift of Newfoundlanders as great storytellers. You know, usually when you make a documentary, you have to sort of tear your hair out, you know, slash your wrist trying to get something out of somebody, you know. But I just had to really ask a question, and Newfoundlanders just love telling stories, and we ended up with so many stories that we couldn't put together. But actually, on the You Are Here website, there's a lot of scenes that we took out of other stories, like Claude or Janice or other members of that team told us. So in case you want more stories, that's where you can find them.
So I have a question for Nick and Diane. In the documentary, you mentioned, of course, your trip to Dover Fault, and of course, you went back there, and you returned to Newfoundland for your honeymoon, of course. And you also mentioned, I do remember you mentioning in the documentary, of so much tragedy, you had found each other. And I think that that's, from what I'm seeing already, it's already a theme that's come up a few times, is balancing that tragic event with the hope and the love that can be found inside of it. How big of a role do you think landing in Gander in particular played in your own story and the blooming of your relationship? And do you think that it would have been different if you had landed anywhere else?
Oh, I'm sure it would have. The fact that we landed in such a wonderful place and we were taken care of. If we'd have landed somewhere else, we might have been left on the airplane for those days, or maybe stuck in the hangar. But not only did they look after us and feed us and give us somewhere to sleep, having done that, then they started to entertain us. And it was...
And they befriended us. We talked at length to the children, to the parents, to everyone who was there. There was always someone in the shelter with us, and we got to know them on a personal basis.
I've already mentioned the wonderful lad, Roy, who we befriended. But in entertaining us, the first night, and it's been such a long time, Moze, since I've seen You Are Here, but the first night, that was a dig. The first night, they screeched us in, this is where you become an honorary Newfoundlander. Right. And Diane, in a rather jovial way, after I bought her a couple of beers, offered to marry me. And it was a long story to that, but during the process of the whole thing.
They thought we were already married because we were hanging out together.
Yeah.
And I was just nobody there. I could be as silly as I wanted to be. I didn't have to be my usual role. And I think that played a part.
Nobody told her we were not invaders. But and then the next day, one of the school teachers, they're taking the plain people on trips and stuff. So we got taken to Dover Fault, and that's where I tried to take Diane's photograph without obviously stalking her with the camera that didn't have a zoom. And then she realized that perhaps
he was interested in me and not the scenery. So that was very pivotal.
So that's a long way of answering your question, but no, without all those help, we perhaps would not have got more than a walk in the park and the odd Christmas card.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
Ellie, I want to jump in again because Diane said something very important about Newfoundland as a place when you're a non-Newfoundlander. You said, Diane, you could be as silly or you could be whoever you wanted, right? And it's a sentiment I share deeply. When I moved to Newfoundland for my studies originally, I was like, I'm going to a place where I know no one and nobody knows me. Right. And I was at a very dark place in my life previous to that. And I could actually be whoever I wanted. And that's why I always say that in Newfoundland that I become the person that you have in front of you right now. Right. So that's partly why I'm so attached to this place. And just like you guys, you met each other and found love among each other. But, you know, it's really a unique place. So I encourage everybody, if you ever are lost in your life, a trip to Newfoundland or Labrador will help you with grounding yourself and finding your true self, right?
Yeah, and take a camera with no zoom with you. Then
that just to jump in. Sorry, go ahead.
They accept everyone.
Go on.
They accept everyone as they are. You don't have to put on a pretense.
They don't care how much money you've got, who you are. Everybody's.
They love everybody.
Sorry, Gavin.
No, that certainly something I picked up on from a few of the interview subjects was just to jump on Valerie's point there. There was almost a sense of liberation because Newfoundland was so not just unexpected for them landing there, but it was so. Alien's not quite the right word, but so different spatially, right? I think Kevin says he looked out the window while they're landing and he says it's just trees and rock and nothing else, right? And it's interesting how liberating that seems to be in the face of all of this uncertainty and confusion and chaos, that there seemed to be something about entering this brand new space that ended up ultimately being positive for everyone.
Yes, as the other Kevin said, it's as though we're back in the 50s.
Yeah.
That's some great discussion that we have started around there. And I mean, certainly a place where we have a tradition of making people drink really, really potent, terrible rum called Screech, for anyone in the audience who's never been screeched in. And to kiss the cold lips of a codfish certainly knows how to be silly. And certainly one of the things that I want to point out before we move into our next question is that I forget who said it in the documentary, but somebody mentioned that in Newfoundland, the first inclination is to feed you. Come in, have a cup of tea, doors always open. And I want to point out that that's not just a phrase in Newfoundland. In most places, we actually do leave the doors unlocked and the car keys in the visor. Come on in whenever you want to is kind of the central organizing tenet, I suppose. This next question I have is from Anne Clear, who is a KPU English alumnus. And I think that this may be something that anyone in the panel can probably speak to. Anne asks, in regards to showing kindness, what would have been done differently if there was a virus such as COVID happening at the time?
Wow. That's a very interesting question. Very hypothetical. I think one of the things, it was interesting during this whole period of the lockdown was that human beings are very resourceful. We adapt, to things that are thrown our way. And we showed it, I think, as we went through this, that, we had to cope, we had to survive, and we developed our own coping mechanisms, whether it was at home or with our friends, or how to survive it, how to not be alone, how to this thing happened in a way because of that of COVID, and I think that Newfoundlanders would have taken that to an nth degree, would have taken our sort of natural inclination to adapt and to sort of cope to an even higher art form because of who they are. So I think that I've no doubt that had COVID hit, they would have found ways to deal with the crisis. And they would have had ways of feeding people and housing people, as we're discovering now that, you can actually, we're coming to a point now where we're living with COVID now. So I don't think anything would have changed in terms of their compassion and generosity, but I think they would actually have developed even more beautiful ways of administering to the needy.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to that question?
Yeah, I will go just a little bit further, Moze, to your answer. I think I will agree with you. And I think Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have actually shown to us already in different events how they are so resilient, but how they will always help each other. So maybe you've heard of Snowmageddon. So like when they had a big snowstorms in Newfoundland last winter, and everybody helped each other shovel their driveway. It was a lot of snow, more than you want ever in your life. And then recently, Category 1 storm Larry hit the eastern part of the island. And again, if your trees were falling in your backyard, people will help you. I have countless numbers of friends in Newfoundland who during the pandemic had to self-isolate, and their neighbors will bring them food. Again, this compassion, this idea of feeding your others, and so on. So I don't know if they will have opened their doors as they did, but they will have opened their doors differently with the same kind of way of, what are your needs? Oh, you need food, you need clothing, you need a place to sleep. Where can we do that? Without necessarily threatening the help of everyone, but I think they will have found a way to do that, because that's and you depicted this in the documentary also, Moze, like how you had to care in Newfoundland, you had to care for each other, otherwise you will not have survived. And it's very true, and it still holds true for the people that live there, right?
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful place, but we don't call it the Rock for nothing. That's for sure. Great. Okay, so I'm going to switch a little bit of focus here. I have a question from Zoe Ann. I have three actually, but I'll sort of work my way through as we go. Zoe Ann is wondering about the animals in the film. So she says, thank you for showing the rescue of the animals during the film that focused on human suffering and love during the week of 9/11 in Gander. She's wondering, were the owners of the animals able to reunite with their pets during their stay in Gander? I don't know, Moze, if you can answer that or not.
I'm just trying to think. I think because of there were some strict policies that came into effect right away because of the bombings, of course. And so, for example, the passengers, as Nick and Diane can tell you, could not take their luggage. They just had to leave with what they had as carry-ons, right? And so anything in the baggage holds was withheld. And I'm pretty sure that the pets were not reunited with their owners. They weren't. And some pets actually were being transported to owners in different cities, so they didn't have necessarily owners on board. So it was really people like Bonnie Harris, who realized there was this crisis with pets on board, and against some pretty stringent pushback, she managed to get the animals out and cared for, and I think, as she describes in the movie, they had been, and some pets had been in the hold for over 36 hours, before they were let out. So, but Bonnie and her team were just instrumental in really taking care of that crisis. And who would have thought, that on top of everything else, there would have been a situation with animals on that day.
Bonnie has related to us that all of the pets were taken to one hangar and they stayed there. And she and her helpers fed and watered and took care of the pets. None of the passengers were allowed actually at the airport near the planes.
Thank you for sharing that, Diane. That's kind of a relief to hear. And it's funny because it certainly never crossed my mind with all of this that, of course, there would probably be pets on board of that plane. Sort of as a follow-up, Zoe Ann was wondering what became of the two primates. She observes as they live a long time. She wonders if they're still alive somewhere in North America or if they're housed somewhere.
So Unger went to Columbus Zoo.
I think both went to the Columbus Zoo.
Yeah, and she had a baby a short while, sometime afterwards, who they named Gander.
Yeah.
Unger apparently passed away, I think it was last year.
Yeah.
Greg, if you could have got one of those on the panel, that would have been amazing.
I tried.
Oh, sorry. I do have kind of a sort of a general question. This one's very, very broad. I think that anyone on the panel could speak to this as well. Valerie, you've written a book about islandness. Gavin, obviously your work in teaching, much like my own in some ways, explores representations about 9/11. Your focus, of course, is graphic fiction and literature, right? I mean, Moze, you decided to tell this story. You chose this story to tell and relate to all of us. And in the documentary, we have the musical as well, right? The Come From Away musical and all of the emphasis on that. And Nick and Diane, you're here in part representative of your own story in the process of all of this. And I suppose why I'm mentioning all of this and all of your roles in it is because what I would be interested in having each of you respond to is, what is the importance of art and culture in coping with an event like 9/11? How might it help us to, change the narrative from one of pure evil, as said in the documentary, to something different? It's a very convoluted question, but at its essence, I'm wondering what each of you thinks the role of art or culture is in dealing with such large tragic events. It's a nice, easy question. Not at all, right?
I think you're muted, Moze, if you're trying to speak.
Should I go first, Nick, or do you want to go first? I'll go first.
Okay, go ahead, Moze. Thank you.
Right. It's a heavy duty question, you know, and I don't have the scholastic or the kind of chops that Gavin would have to answer this question, you know. But all I can offer you is just something entirely personal in answering that question, and that was really about really the tipping point for me to commit to this movie, because you know when you are doing a movie, it's part of your life for 4 or 5 years, and we actually started this, you know, as early as 2015, you know, so during the early part of 2016, during the election, you know, across the border, there was a political discourse that was so toxic, that was so horrific, the likes of which I had never seen before. It was talks of, as you all well remember, talk of banning Muslims, talk of putting up walls, and really a mistrust of anything strange, of anything outside our own experience. And I really felt helpless, you know, and I really felt like, what's going on, you know, like, and what was worse was that the vestiges of that was actually happening in Canada as well. I could see it was actually coming over, you know. And I was angry, I was frustrated, you know, and I was sort of working, and Come From Away had happened, and I was sort of dealing with the idea of making a film based on the real people who inspired it. But it was at that point where I said to myself, how can I change? What can I do to say that this is not who we are? This political discourse, this toxicity doesn't capture all of us. And then really, the answer was right in front of me. You know, it was like, well, I can make a movie. I can make a film. I can show that the best of us actually is encompassed within our capacity for compassion. So I guess part of me believed that film would be valuable, would be a way to provide a different window to another part of who we are. So the question is, yes. I mean, I don't know if art can change the world, you know, in the ways that political movements can, you know, like really, you know, incredible stuff like that. But certainly, you know, we have to try. You know, we have to do what we can within our means.
I don't think you gave yourself enough credit for the concision of your answer. That was great. Thank you.
Okay, can I maybe answer a little bit?
Yes, please, Nick, jump in.
The tragic events of 9/11, and then we look at 9/12, because that's
Right.
That's
it's
what
a 9/12 story.
Come From Away, You Are Here are really about. And it was the foresight of Michael Rubinoff to want to write a play or a musical about the events of 9/12, which Moze is very, very well documented. And so for the longest time, Diane and I had survivor's guilt, and we weren't comfortable sharing our story outside friends and family. But now we go and see Come From Away, and the audience, it's an emotional roller coaster, but the audience come out of there and they want to share their story with us. It makes them feel better. And the world really needs something like that, right?
It gives a human face to everything that's happened, I think.
I'm getting spotlighted by the sun.
I know, the sun.
Sorry about that. It's normally cloudy in England.
Yeah.
It must be the brightness of the film that just brings that out in the weather. Valerie, Gavin, would you like to add something? The role of art or culture in dealing with something like 9/11?
It's a heavy duty question. I think reading is an inherently empathetic act. I think to read something or to watch a film, to sit in the theater and to watch a film, is to be invited to occupy the perspective of other people. Reading a book is the same thing. Whether you disagree with the thoughts on the page or agree with the thoughts on the page, you're being asked to share someone's perspective on the world. And so I think the potential for art is precisely what the film celebrates. It's acts of empathy, it's acts of compassion, it's acts of understanding. And I think this is sort of what Valerie's opening comments in terms of polarization. These are important skills to have. These are important muscles to exercise, the ability to occupy the perspective of someone else and try to understand where they're coming from, because I think that's precisely where a lot of our ongoing tensions and maybe this increasing polarization is coming from, is just a stubbornness to understand the way other people see the world.
Thanks so much, Gavin. I think that really comes through in the film when we have that family of Syrian refugees, and the comments that are made is that we're all just people at the heart of it. And we laugh at a lot of the same jokes, and we like to share food, and all of that is also part of who we are, right? Valerie?
Yeah, I think culture and art actually can change the world. I will push Mo's reflection a step further. And they're a way to actually, in their own way, to tell a story. So I really appreciate, Moze, your choice of song for the closing, because the song The Islander is a song that every Newfoundlander knows by heart and will sing at the top of their lungs. So the chorus is really nice, and I'm an Islander born and bred, and I will be one until I die, right? But if you listen to actually a little more of the song beyond the chorus, then you have a story, right? It's like, oh, I had to move out of Newfoundland. I work in New York. I did not like it, right? It's too much traffic, it's too much lights. And then, oh, the French people, that's us Quebecois, right? We don't like them, right? Because they pretend Labrador is us, so which is a third between the two provinces. And then there's like this, oh, we have oil off or shore, and how are we going to develop it, right? So there's all those bits of his story in and like tales of stories that Newfoundlanders had to live through for that are represented in this one song, right? And this is one aspect of culture, right? Gavin has named it, books, movies, and so on. When you actually take the time to listen, to watch, and to share those stories, I think you become involved and part of this political movement that you're talking about, Moze, and that actually brings change and brings. So yes, I do think there's a very important role in that to share stories, and Newfoundland is a place where the culture has been transmitted like this to tell the stories of the past and the future. It's very profound, it's very ingrained in it, it's very unique also. So I think it's just one aspect of this, but yes, I think it can change the world, absolutely. I have to hope it does, right? Otherwise.
Thank you so much. I mean, for those of us who work in academia, we're coming at it with the assumption I would say with the assumption that representation absolutely does matter. And so I think it's all the more important that we have this film that does change the narrative quite literally from those images. And it was quite staggering to see that footage of the Twin Towers falling. I haven't seen that probably almost in 20 years. And it was just as impactful now as it was then. But I was also struck by that shot as well at the end with Shani Ganuk and the Islander. I've seen people in bars in downtown St. John's scared literally to death, tourists, because all of a sudden every Newfoundlander in there is stomping and singing this chorus. Gavin, yeah.
Just to circle back to something Moze said very early on, and that was the decision to include footage of planes hitting the towers and the towers coming down. I know for someone who discusses September 11th in a classroom, Certainly something I grapple with is how much of that material to introduce to students, how much footage to bring into the classroom. And it's amazing how that's changed in just a relatively short amount of time. When, you first start bringing material from September 11th into a classroom, 2007, 2008, students in that classroom lived through September 11th. And when you sort of go around the room, they had memories of that morning and television screens and distraught parents or distraught teachers. When you go and discuss that day now, you're introducing this material to students for whom it's not a lived experience. It's actually a historical event. And so the challenge that I sort of struggle with is how much of that raw footage to share with them, to give them a sense of the horror of that day, but also the danger of that becoming gratuitous or traumatic. It's obviously traumatic for people who live through it. So I'd be interested to know more from Moze about that negotiation or that conversation about including the footage of that morning.
It's a great question. Moze?
Yeah, it was a really big discussion. We actually had one point where we actually cut away from the first hit, or the second hit, really. The second hit which captured really, by that point, something was wrong. So a lot more cameras were focused on the towers. So we even played with that, the planes coming across the skyline, cutting before it actually hit. And but I think, for people who weren't there that day, I think our sort of rationale, if I can just go back there for a second, our rationale was that we had to show it because to reveal the enormity of the tragedy, of what happened. First of all, these great architectural structures, came down, that were so beloved and so incredibly emblematic of what New York represented for a lot of people. But beyond that, it was the close to 3,000 lives that were extinguished within a few seconds, within actually a couple of hours from when the two towers fell. But so that was a decision, we made. I said, no, we have to show it, to show the enormity of it all. But we were very judicious. We could have done way more. We could have really done way more of the devastation afterwards in the streets, and which was actually in some ways more horrific. What happened though was, it was interesting. With having made that decision, then we were placed in a rather precarious situation for some of the screenings we were involved in. When we realized that there'd be some survivors coming, some first responders who were there. So it was, and then we realized, of course, this could be triggering. This could be, a lot of these people are dealing with PTSD, seriously, And so we were worried, like, oh dear, what have we done? This could be not great for those people. So actually it was Diane Davis, who's one of the school teacher, in the film, who alerted us to that, and said, she was there at the first screening in Newfoundland. Our first screening was in Newfoundland because we wanted to share the first screening with the people who this was dedicated to. And she said, Moze, you may have a problem with this, with people who are suffering from PTSD and who want to see the film. And so anyway, how we dealt with it going forward was that at festivals, we made an announcement that there are scenes that may be disturbing of people, to be aware of this, and that we understand that this may be triggering for a lot of people. So I think in retrospect, we made the right decision. I think, we had to show it. But at the same time, it came with complications as well.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful. I appreciate that.
Wonderful. I actually have a follow-up, if I may, that sort of piggybacks, because like I mentioned, my own research is on 9/11 as a benchmark for representations in horror film, with zombies in particular, believe it or not, because they are often represented as the other, as that alien force pushing in on nations, crossing boundaries. And so one of the things that ends up coming up in my own classes is that negotiation between, this tragic event that you don't want to make gratuitous and how that's represented. But one thing that I recall in my own research is that any attempt to sort of deal with this event filmically, Oliver Stone's World Trade Center in 2006 comes to mind, got terrible reviews, generally speaking. United 93, also 2006, did a little bit better, but ultimately my impression was that it was a little bit too raw and too real and too close, and evoking all of those things you mentioned, post-traumatic stress disorder. Horror was a way of representing some of this stuff as an allegory. But all of this is sort of leading to my question here. I'm sorry, I'm an academic. I can't help the preamble. What I'm wondering is that your documentary is made in 2017, right? And so I'm wondering, Moze, do you think that we needed this much time and perspective to make this film? Do you think that you could have done this, for instance, 5 years after the event, even 10 years after the event, or would it have been a different story because of all of the the rawness and the emotion and the loss and the trauma associated with 9/11?
Wow, that's a great question. No, there's no way we could have made this film within 2 years after 9/11 for one big reason. And that was because it took David Hein and Irene Sankoff, two brilliant artists, to go to Newfoundland on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 and to research that story, and that's where they first met Nick and Diane, and they met everybody else who became part of that show eventually. And I think we needed that time for some perspective to come into place, so that when David and Irene went, people were ready to talk about it. I don't know if people would have been ready to talk about it 2 or 3 years after that. As it was, Claude actually says in the movie, that he hadn't let himself cry all those 5 days, and all this sort of difficulty that he had to manage and the crisis that was on his hands. So I think it was that. I think Claude's answer to that question was very much how we all felt. We nowhere near trying to figure this thing out right now. So I think the timing was just perfect. Was really at the time that they went in 2011 to research that story, and they came back and they workshopped it at Sheridan College. But I think also, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but I think the world was really more than ready for the message that Come From Away is offering. Because like me, everyone else was sort of looking at this horrible development of events politically that we couldn't believe was happening, So I think the timing of its arrival on the scene couldn't have been better. And it was the incredible message we all needed to have to counteract the baseness of what was going on. And certainly it inspired me, to say, well, I could use this film as a way of countering the argument.
Thank you. And we're back to the power of storytelling again, right?
Nick, did you want to add anything to that about being ready to tell yours? Were you ready to tell your story?
You're absolutely right. Diane and I think I mentioned a little earlier, it's survivor's guilt. And in fact, when we went back to Newfoundland for our honeymoon, we were pounced upon by reporters. In fact, one day they spent 4 hours outside our friend's house wanting to talk to us. Somebody had leaked the story. We were not prepared to share that. We didn't feel it was appropriate. And it wasn't until 2009 when Tom Brokaw was going to make Operation Yellow Ribbon that we decided that maybe the time was right. And if anybody was going to do the job without sensationalizing it, Tom Brokaw.
Well, I think we wanted the emphasis to be on the Newfoundland people. We're not the story in this, they are. And we wanted it to be a tribute to them and for them to be the stars. So if there's any stars to be had in this, we wanted it to be them because they're the compassionate, sweet, wonderful, giving people that they are. And the world needs to see that humanity can be like that.
Yeah. And right now, the world needs a feel-good story like Come From Away gives.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for that contribution. I'm wondering, Valerie, if you could tell us a little bit about your concept of islandness in your book, and how that concept is informed by your time in Newfoundland and what you feel makes the story of Gander so unique.
Sure. So the concept of islandness is this idea that islands, so land surrounded by water, depicts something different, that they are different. And if, and I'm sure you, Nick and Diane and Moze can attest to that, but when you step foot on Newfoundland, you can't really pinpoint exactly what's going on, but you know it's different. Like, you know you've arrived to a special place that is unique, that is different. So this concept of islandness is trying to actually demonstrate or show what it is, what makes Newfoundland unique. So I've, throughout my research, I've divided this concept into various variables, but one that I want to highlight to you, and that because it's linked to our discussion, is the cultural dimension of islandness and how it is unique. And I think the documentary, and I'm sure that the lived experience of Nick and Diane and Moze also, when you were shooting the film, can attest to this. But there's many things that make Newfoundland, and I want to apologize to the people of Labrador, because Newfoundland and Labrador is a province, but the Labrador is attached to the mainland. It also has its unique identity. We could talk about this in detail. So we're really looking at the island of Newfoundland here, but in the movie and in Newfoundland, like there's a lot of those cultural elements that are depicted in the documentary. So Moze, in your introductory remarks, you mentioned the Jigs dinner. So a very typical Sunday, usually not Friday night, but Sunday meal in Newfoundland with, and even in the movie when they were like talking about cod tongs and salt meat, this is what that's what you eat at the Jigs dinner, right? Like, so there's this is very traditional and very cultural. Like, if you tell somebody in the Lower Mainland here in Vancouver, we're going to have a Jigs dinner, unless you're talking to Kelly and I, maybe, and a few handful of Newfoundlanders here, nobody's going to understand this, right? Like, so it's a really unique aspect of the place. Other things that you've mentioned is the infamous or famous Screech Inn. And this is a very interesting, I just want to tell you a little bit about this, the story of the Screech Inn, because it's actually very interesting. So we think it's a very old tradition, but it actually was pushed forward by the Newfoundland Liquor Commission in the 1970s during a period that we call the Newfoundland Renaissance, where actually Newfoundland is trying to get out of like 20-something years of political dominance by the first premier of Newfoundland, Joey Smallwood, and is actually trying to revive itself. And so there's this big emphasis on old songs or traditions. And Screech and this rum was part of this triangular way of, between England, Newfoundland, and the Caribbean, right? So there's an history, there's a link here, but the Screech Inn was actually, this tradition was invented in the 1970s, and the Newfoundland government will distribute a pamphlet, ways to screech, right? So how to do it, right? So, and it's really interesting, this metaphor of Screech Inn, right? So like the come from away, this is a really nice term and it's really joyful, but it's actually a way to distinguish Newfoundlanders from non-Newfoundlanders, right? But when you become an honorary Newfoundlander, when you become Screech Inn, you are doing several things. You have to kiss a cod. So you have to embrace the fisheries, which is why at the first place settlers came to Newfoundland, right? You have to say Newfoundlandism, yeah? You have to say those sentences in Newfoundland English. So you have to embrace the language of the people. And then you have to drink this worst rum you've ever drank in your life, that is Screech. I apologize, but it's really not good. And then you have become, and you've embraced all of those things, right? And you've become part of this culture, of this uniqueness. But despite that, you will always be a CFA or come from away. You will always be that, despite being an honorary Newfoundlander, despite embracing this. So there's really an interesting tension here. Another thing that you depict really well in your movie is that song I mentioned before. So this joyful kind of music, very typical of the place. So this cultural aspect of islandness is really salient. That's what makes Newfoundland so unique. It's all those aspects of culture that are quite distinct. Talks about the resilience of the people, the suffering, but also the goodness of the people of that place. So sorry, that was a lot of rambling here, but this is a little bit about that.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm assuming that maybe everybody here today, except maybe Gavin, has been screeched in. Would that be a correct assumption, everybody? Because if you are, I'd actually be wondering, just as a silly little flippant side note, is what's worse, kissing the codfish or drinking the Screech?
We also had to sing a song.
Oh, you got cheated, I think.
Of where we were from. And I said I was from Texas. So they said, well, the Yellow Rose of Texas, that's going to be your song.
And I sang All I Want to Be is a Londoner from London Town. I think the Screech was preferable to the cod. Yes, and it's supposedly bad Jamaican rum, I'm told.
Yeah. But it was a very, very fun time and made us feel like we were a part of something.
Yes, it took our mind
when we're in a different country, everything's going on, but we felt like we were one of them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add that the actual Screeching Ceremony is actually quite long. I mean, because in addition to the kissing the cod and also drinking the Screech, there are other things as part of the ceremony. You have to have this little piece of wiener, you know, and there's a section called dry bread. And of course, you have, you're wearing these sailor's caps, and there's one other, I can't remember. Oh, we had a capelin. We had to eat the capelin, which are these narrow, silvery, pencil-shaped fish. That was the hardest part, is eating the capelin. The kissing the cod was okay, but the eating the capelin was, but you know, the night we were screeched in, I couldn't help but think, my God, this is almost just like Passover. You know, our ceremony, because every little piece of food, like the matzah bread or dipping the herbs in salted water, they all have very symbolic significance, you know, and it sort of reminded me of that. You know, I said, and they do, each of these little elements has some kind of a symbolic component to them. So it was quite good. It was like coming back to my people.
You're right, Moze. It's a very long ceremony, and the master of ceremony may make it longer by asking people to sing songs, but also by, you know, is there any Newfoundlanders here? No, yes, maybe. And then, no, I don't hear you, louder. And then it can last, you know, a few hours, depending on how this all unfolds. But I think the symbolic, as you mentioned, is quite important. Like the sailor hat, again, embracing the culture, embracing the fishery, embracing the weather, and so on. So I think, yeah, you're very correct about this symbolic aspect of it all. There's a lot in there to unpack. Yeah, we could write a full book just on screeching.
I just one of the things I just want to share quickly with you. One of the things that was quite fascinating that we learned while we were making the movie was actually Newfoundland has a history of saving people. Because of its proximity and location in the North Atlantic, a lot of shipwrecks have happened, you know, including the Titanic. So they have a history of going out into sea and rescuing people and bringing people back. In a way, it seemed like they were destined to be dealt a good hand during 9/11, you know, when they had to save close to 7,000 people.
Thank you all so much for indulging my question about screech-ins there and your experience with it. Luckily, and again, I think that Valerie has sort of hit the nail on the head here, because I can sit here smugly as a Newfoundlander and say that I've never kissed a codfish, and nor will I ever. But I'd actually like to ask Gavin, because we're still talking about these different cultures and traditions and means of storytelling. Gavin, I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to what you think of the representation per se of 9/11 in this film, as maybe compared to some of the other things that you might teach. Like, where are the major deviations? I know you mentioned that we're moving from absences to excess in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned a few films too, Kelly, that have responded obviously directly and indirectly to 9/11, and often it's treated allegorically. I mean, I think the challenge with that question is there's so many different kinds of literary responses now, 20 years later, to September 11th, that you can find very early kinds of novelistic responses that are very fragmented in terms of how they tell the story, and you can see them really grappling with notions of identity and place and culture. You can find books that now are interested in satirizing how September 11th has been politicized, and you can find reimaginings of that day where only one of the towers falls, and actually one of the towers is still standing. So for me, in some ways, it just comes back to that idea of perspective and empathy, and the film really sort of celebrating that aspect of storytelling and what it offers an audience, for sure.
Thanks so much, Gavin. I have a question from Zoe Ann again, that we'll see if anybody perhaps can answer this one. She's wondering about the children that are featured in the film. She's asking, how have the children done through the 20 years since 9/11 with their experience in Gander? They would be ages 20 through 30 plus at this time, and I'm wondering how they've been affected, as the film mainly shows the effects on adults and their experiences. The children would have been affected somehow negatively and or positively by their parents / caregivers' responses and other adult responses around them during their time in Gander. So she's wondering what's become of the kids in this film ultimately. I don't know if anyone can speak to that.
To be honest with you, I don't know about the aftermath of the kid's story, but I know that as Oz tells the story, was that a lot of them were wish kids on their way to Disney World, and so of course they were very upset that they couldn't go on. But by the end of the 5th day, as Oz describes it, no one missed having not gone to Disney World. That they had a really great time. They were well taken care of. They were entertained, and there was a big birthday. I think the wonderful story that Oz tells in the film was that there was they decided not to celebrate this little girl's birthday, because then it would not be fair to the other 350 people, kids. And Oz came up with a brilliant idea. Said, well, in that case, we'll have a birthday party for 350 kids. So everybody will have a birthday party. And his daughter, of course, dressed up as the mascot, Commander Gander, Lisa. And so I can't imagine that they wouldn't have had a great memory leaving Newfoundland, given the lovely birthday parties and the gifts. And I'm just trying to think of myself in that situation. You know, I would never forget that.
Thank you, Moze. Nick and Diane, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to interact with many of the children that were there. I wonder if you have any impressions of them, at least from the time.
We do, but they're with the Newfoundland children and not the passengers.
Yeah, we didn't really meet any passengers' children. There was a baby on our flight, but she was probably 6 months old. But the children there, the city is so remote that most of them had not met a stranger, especially someone from another country. And I know the kids there were just thrilled to talk to anyone who would talk to them and share. They wanted to know what my grandkids like to do and what they studied at school and what sports they played. And it was just finding out about another culture.
We've been back 9 times, I think it is, to Newfoundland. And so during those visits, we've seen the children from the 2 main families that looked after us grow up and get married and have their own kids. And thanks to Moze, we met up with our favorite little boy, Roy, who's must be in his mid-30s by now.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Have you, sorry to jump in, have you been to other parts of Canada, Nick and Diane? I know in the documentary you mentioned, Diane, that was your first trip to Canada.
Yeah.
Have you been elsewhere?
Yes, but yes, we have. We've been to Toronto because the show's been there.
Montreal.
And Montreal.
But your son lives, Nick's son lives in Edmonton.
My son lives in Edmonton, so I've been there.
Yeah. We've been there. Yeah.
We spent one Christmas there. I don't think we'll bother spending another Christmas. It was way too cold.
-30.
That was cold.
Yeah.
Nick and Diane, I wondered if you could comment on what the experience was like watching the film for the first time, since you're the only people on the panel who are with us who are featured in the film.
Oh, the highlight for me is because Moze remember this. I think it was filmed over a year in various little pieces and so forth. And we were watching it in Gander for the first time. And where Nick turns to after Diane reveals her age, and I just turn to the camera and I say, I'm her toy boy. And I could not remember doing that. And I just about fell off my seat when we watched it. And now that's my line. I said it quite a few times since.
Well, he's 7 years younger than I am. Yeah. So I guess that's appropriate. But it was
extremely emotional.
Yes,
it had us in tears every time I see it and we meet Roy.
Right. Well, not only that, it's everyone's story. And we've heard other stories of other people who are not in Come From Away. And we've talked to so many people, survivors, families, Newfoundlanders. It's been an eye-opening experience for the last 20 years.
Yes, and for anybody that watches Come From Away, there was one a reporter in DC in the early stages, and he was talking about our relationship, and he said, well, it had to be true. Nobody could have made all that up. And everything you see in Come From Away is true. And Moze's documentary, it confirms everything.
Right.
The two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
I just have to add something to the tail end of what Nick and Diane just said, was that when we were shooting there, I turned to Peter and Bill, our producers, and I said, wouldn't it be great if we had the first premiere screening here in Gander? Wouldn't it be great, And say, yeah, it would be great. Never thinking it was going to happen, but as the film was nearing completion, it took almost a year to complete. We said, well, why can't we make it happen? And we reached out. Of course, we should have known this, is that of course they bent over backwards, to make sure the screening happened. They helped us find the theater, and they helped us spread the word out to the community that we were coming, and we were having the very first public screening in Gander at the Joey Smallwood Theater. And it was, of course, we were so excited and so thrilled, and that we were going to go to see our friends again, and Nick and Diane were going to come, and it was going to be just amazing. But as the lights went down, I just was overcome with fear. I said, what if they hate it? Like, what if they absolutely hate this movie? And our first screening, you know, it's going to be an absolute disaster. It's going to, anyway, so I sat there shaking like a leaf, you know, going, oh God, please, I hope you like it. I hope you like it. But as soon as the lights came up, they all gave us an incredible standing ovation. And I just, in my dying day, will never forget that. What a relief that was. You know, we said, oh God, we did okay. They approve, you know, because that meant the world to us that we, because they trusted us and they opened up their homes and their storytelling, and I just wanted to make sure that they were proud of the film as much as we were.
Moze, Moze, you made us laugh, you made us cry. It was off the chart.
You made us remember. Yeah.
Yeah, Moze, I think you actually, you did a very great justice. And in your movie, the people actually say that to you, like you showed us that, you know, in the past, Newfoundlanders in movies or in TV series have always been depicted as like, you know, Newfie jokes or like, you know, this useless person or something really like this, like dumb or something, right? So I think for both the musical and your movie, you depict the people as they are, but as also the great people that they are, and not just portray as a joke, which has been quite offending and offensive for the people of that place. So that was a big, I think they could not have liked it, is what I'm saying, just because it's really a true representation of the kindness of the people and how they actually are, which previous portrays have not done that justice.
Yes, and that's something that was mentioned in the documentary as well, right? Is that relief from the community about the positive way that it was and the accurate way that they were represented. Unfortunately, we are in our almost last 6 minutes, so we'll have to start wrapping up. There is a question from Judy from Moze that maybe we can address quickly before we turn it back to Greg for final remarks. So Moze, Judy Fawcett is asking in the chat, or she's saying you have a budget of vision and timelines to keep to during the filming, but she's wondering, were you expecting the emotional involvement once you met the people from Gander as well as from the airplanes, and did that make a difference in how you approached filming the story? So this will be our last question.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to quickly add that, you know, I really, we had an amazing team on this film, editor Kathy Galkin, cinematographer Ian Kerr and Stephen Chung. Of course, our two wonderful producers as well. Sounds like an acceptance speech, but, you know, but I just want to say, where filmmaking is always a combined effort, and of course, you know, I have to mention their names because we worked very tightly, closely together throughout the whole thing. But so the question is, was it an emotional experience for me during the making? Is that what the question was?
It was where you
oh yeah, I think yeah. Oh, did I expect? Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely, you know, I've made so many documentaries before, you know, and I have a, you know, I plan and I come prepared, you know, for every day, and but what I wasn't ready for and prepared for was choking up, you know. And I was a number of times I just had to try and struggle to hold it together, you know. And you don't want to show emotion because you want to come across as being in control and, you know, being unflappable. But it was, you know, I had to really stay focused, you know, because a lot of the stories, not necessarily horrible stories,
But they're actually just enormous acts of kindness, where you sort of listen to these stories and what people did, and not necessarily from the Newfoundlands, but the people from Nick and Diane, the recipients of that. When we went, I got a really close eye, a close hand view of what really happened there. And the magnitude of what they did, it was so little. I mean, Newfoundland was different from other cities like Montreal, Toronto, that also took in people because they had no infrastructure. They had absolutely no hotels, no restaurants, nothing to speak of in terms of, a medical crew, whatever. They did it all themselves. They pulled stuff out of their kitchens, their bedrooms, their basements, their living rooms in order to make this happen. So it was very, that was incredible. And I wasn't prepared to lose it. But I'm grateful. I'm so grateful I had this opportunity that they gave me the opportunity to make this film and meet people like Nick and Diane, and of course the rest as well.
Thank you so much, Moze. I think we're all very grateful that you made this film, and I'm very thankful to have been part of this today. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg Chan. But before I do, I just want to say thank you to all of you for this amazing experience today.
Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
On behalf of KDocs and the KPU community, I just want to thank the entire panel, and in particular our special guest, Moze, and our very special guests, Nick and Diane Marson, and of course, our in-house experts, Valerie and Gavin. And a very special thank you to Kelly, who did such an amazing job moderating today. And also I'd like to thank Moze for making the film and everything that it represents. It's been such a wonderful discussion, and I'd like to thank the audience as well. Thank you for joining us for today's session, which of course we have recorded, and I will be sharing this on the KDocs YouTube channel. So thank you very much, everyone.